All right, Twitch land. It is Monday night, and that means that it is time to start journeying onto the worlds that we create via gaming. So all kinds of fun, all kinds of excitement, and you can see we've got our initial piece here with the campaign we've been working on, and we've been working on a level 1 through 20 D&D campaign. And with this campaign, we've gone through and used a lot of tools. Really talked a lot about the first tier, which is all about that kind of getting to know you piece. We set our tier 1. We have our NPC, who is also our patron. He is the owner of the inn where our adventure is going to start. We've explored the city of Goldgate and had that really prepped up to be the primary area that we're going to adventure in the first few levels. And really this is a little bit of a departure. Sometimes wilderness adventures are more common, especially in lower levels, going and exploring goblin caves, going and encountering orcs who are overtaking wagons of goods. But sometimes there are also things like ancient tombs to explore, all different kinds of aspects you can take. But I really wanted to start a little more urban adventure with a small town. That really allows us to have the group kind of forced together so that they have to learn how to function as an adventuring group. Otherwise, you could skip that completely by kind of putting the burden on the players of how did your adventuring group start and get together and start your adventure with the party already being formed. But generally what I find on campaigns, especially starting at level 1, is the players are not like super familiar with their characters as it is. So allowing them to work together allows them to become more ingrained with their character or more passion in their character, as well as in the group dynamic. So with our tier 1, we go through and explore the areas of the city that we've built, starting with canals and then sewers, and then bleeding out into the woods and hills around the city. So we slowly start taking the curtain back on our game world. Now when we get into tier 2, which was the second area that we left off, we have a shift in the entire complexity of the campaign. Now they're not just becoming those local heroes, now we need to expand them into the region. And to do this, we really have set the precedent of the city that they initially were going to adventure to become a part of the Adventure League. We established that in the introduction. Now they're going to be journeying to that said city. So to upend them again, that city is no longer there. Based on the premise that we've wanted to create, we now have to shift the gears a lot and turn the next bit of adventure kind of on its heels due to something that's going on. With the first one, it was a storm that drove them into the city. This one here is actually the city itself that they are adventuring to has sunken. And by sunken, I mean it has gone into a sinkhole in the earth and the city is no more. With that, that should lead to fantastic adventure opportunities for us to explore more region impacting aspects. So based on the information that we already have, we know that this is going to be Denethal is going to be our big bad for this tier as well as the following tier. So this is going to be an ongoing, and this is going to be an opponent. But we also want to have some type of an establishment of friendliness as well. They still need that type of patron. And I'd been thinking about this on and off. When they finally get to the city, what are they going to encounter? What are they going to see? How are we going to set the stage and set the scene? So with this scene here, I want to have the hole just be a massive hole with very little bit of like a back curtain wall and a small subsection of the city still standing, with this massive gaping hole going down into rubble about 150 feet down. And on the edge of this hole, I want to have a camp. And leading the camp as the adventurers come in, I want to have some type of a guard who is formerly posted in the city, who approaches them and kind of gives them some detail and some information. Now, I have not yet gotten to this level. We're just starting this whole process here. So for this person, we are going to say this is going to be, I don't know that I want to make him like a captain or anything. So what I'm actually going to do is bring up my Google, which is always your friend. And I am going to just do a quick search of some, we will say, Crusader ranks. I don't know if they even had ranks, but let's check and see. Well, it looks like they did actually have some ranks. Oh, so they had officers, knights, and soldiers. So this one here, we are going to have be a sergeant. I like that. A sergeant for the town that used to be here, which was a larger town. And we're just going to go to a name generator so we can just pop up a quick name. I'm a big fan of using things like name generator, so you know, just pop things in there and have it all be done. Let's go to this generator and we are going to go with Hammond Brightblade. So he is currently, we'll put in charge of rescue and defense. So I want Sergeant Hammond to kind of be leading a little bit of a tent city, trying to go through with certain men and try to rescue people from the rubble. Though now it's been a number of days, probably about 5 days, depending on how long the characters take in the city. I want to really set the pace as they're in the Goblin Caves of when this happens, so they'll feel the tremors from it as they are just getting to the Goblin Caves, and then they'll take a couple of days to journey to it. But I want to set the stage early on, so when they get up here, the information that Sergeant Hammond tells them about the city just suddenly sinking into the earth with these massive rumblings and shakings and earthquake going on. Currently, they are in charge of doing both rescue and defense. So rescue is pulling from the rubble, but then also defense. At night, foes are coming from tunnels in the sinkhole. So I'm going to grab just an extra scratch paper here, and I'm just going to kind of jot down a little bit of the area that I'm thinking of with a massive sinkhole here. So here is the road up, and then the road that would go kind of east and west. So this is the road the player characters will be going on. And then I actually want to have a camp over here. So this is a camp 1, and then I'm also going to do a camp here too. And this is going to be a dry riverbed. And it's dry because the river from mountains is currently draining into our rubble hole, or into the sinkhole. So this kind of gives us the scene that we want to describe and talk about. So all of this down here is just rubble, absolute ruin, and nothing there. And we will pop on here that we have got a good 150-foot drop to rubble. And then on here with these camps, I want to have some type of a cavern, right? This is an area where the cavern is located right above the ruin line. And this is the area where, let's say, foes are coming from. Now, the reason I want to do this is because as we get into this tier, the adventuring days are going to be longer. We've got 2.25 adventuring days here, almost 2.5. And so if I have multiple pieces, that means they can go in, do the encounters and exit, and then rest up, which is okay, but I want them to really have to let's say, do their adventuring day. I want it to be less broken up, less support. So I want to make it more challenging and them have to think about how to maximize the opportunities that they have, the supplies that they have, the magic and feats and everything that they have over 2.5 days basically. So rather than having a couple of entrances to caves, I just want to have just one cave going in where they will start this adventure. Now, we're not getting into the adventure itself yet because for me, this aspect here of setting the stage and really thinking about the types of elements that we want to portray to the players is going to be super important. So we know there are mountains that direction, the river with the waterfall. We've got 2 different camps, the road coming up. So we could do just a small encampment here, and this is where they should encounter Hammond. So Hammond, his primary goal is doing as much rescue as he can from the rubble, but also coordinating for the multiple camps, getting people away from this area. He's trying to coordinate people to leave and go to neighboring villages and towns. So he has got his hands full and very minimal people to assist. So for this aspect of the city, I do want to have some bits of ruins, a bit of the wall, let's say, with a tower maybe, and then a gate, and then a little bit of wall before it falls down. So not very much left. Most of it was broken and sinking, but we'll have a couple of buildings here. So the reason I want to have some of these elements here is I want the player characters to be able to utilize that possibly for exploration and prepping up for the night, maybe watching for the night. I want to give them opportunities to be tactical and think about how they want to take on this mission of seeing what's coming out of the tunnels as well as should they go in pursuit. So the Sergeant Hammond is also in charge of the defense, so he will give them information that there are creatures that are coming out of this tunnel, and he and his couple of guards and militia that he is able to gather up have been watching this as best as possible to keep them at bay while they get all of the people out and away. I want this to be a looming threat, so I don't want everybody to have abandoned yet. And there aren't going to be many survivors, of course, because the city was taken suddenly as it started going into the sinkhole. Very few survivors, but who are there, I want them to be absolutely in the process of leaving. They just haven't been able to yet, whether it's due to injuries and sickness, whether it's due to just lack of coordination. While some have fled already, the primary goal, I want Sergeant Hammond to stay behind for the people. He can't go adventuring into the caves, even though he wants to. I really want him to. I have to set the stage up that these places are absolutely dependent on him and his coordination. So the area-wise, we know there are mountains. We know there are going to be foothills before the mountains. This is kind of on the high plains area of our map, and then down to the coast where our adventurers have come from. So as we start thinking about this large city that has suddenly sunken into the ground, what does that mean for the people who are going to be in here? Now, because it was a large city that really is on a massive trade route, we have to think there are going to be traders and merchants. There are going to be more aspect of that than there will be craftsmen and such. So the majority of this town is going to be based on that kind of trade and storage. Merchants, people who are coordinating and maybe even taking some raw goods and producing goods on them. Maybe it's they're taking the wool and spinning it, or maybe they're taking the yarns and weaving. Whatever the case may be, there is going to be limited craftsmen, and this is primarily going to be to finished product. So some of the survivors that we can have, just to kind of generally your character should want to go through and talk to people and really see what's going on with their own kind of two eyes. So some of the survivors, I want them to be definitely injured, allowing any clerics or paladins or anybody who has healing and wants to do healing an opportunity to share some of the aspects of them. I want them to be scared, and I want them to be not used to adventure, hardship, etc. These people should be dependent on help with this big of an upset. Now, if you think about your entire city just sinking down into a sinkhole beneath the ground, that is absolutely quite an ordeal. So all of the people should be, just beside themselves. Asking for help and worried about their loved ones and themselves. Now, Sergeant Hammond, I want him to be that focal point, that strong voice of reason and reassurance. He is definitely thinking about the people who are reliant on him and others to help them out. He is not going to want to abandon the people because it is his job to take care of the people. But as the adventurers come up, he should quickly realize that, hey, these are some capable figures who are coming up to join the Adventurers League or the Adventuring Guild, and let's try to use them as best we can. So he is going to set them on course, or give them the opportunity for questing down into our cavern, into the subterranean cavern beneath this city. Information he should have is going to be, as well as the others, Um, when the earth trembled, the ground itself began to swallow the fair city. Let's say buildings, tall and strong, horrible spelling, sorry, buckled, cracked, and fell in on themselves as a thick dust spewed from the rubble. Let's see, what else could be another indicator that something was wrong? A chorus of screams and shrieks. Grew fainter and more silent as the rubble settled. Now, some important aspects is when is this going to have happened? Is it going to be night or day? So ultimately we know that the cavern is going to lead into underground caverns and underground areas, which really leads into things like Underdark. You know, we pushed a big comment that we're going to have Underdark creatures talking about who the encounters are going to focus on, who our bad guys are going to be. So we're going to say at night, while on patrol of the countryside, Sergeant Hammond and select few were spared. And that could leave our NPC having that bit of guilt and remorse for he was on duty, but because he was on duty, he wasn't there to do anything. And that could be kind of that blessing and curse feeling. So we could really play him up as that tragic, heroic figure who has a lot of remorse for not being able to help in a way that he feels he should be able to. But thankfully he wasn't there, so that he's alive today to be able to help. So one of those funky dynamics that you can really drive home an NPC into. Now we've already got a good idea on who the people are in multiple camps. Now, one thing I want to avoid is having there be opportunity for the players to, I hate to say coerce or blackmail, but it comes down to it. I don't want them to murder hobo these people. They've lost everything. I don't anticipate there to be any supplies or anything like that. I would imagine what they were able to salvage out of these couple of remaining buildings and tower they already have, and now they're just trying to divvy up what little they had from the the soldiers who were on patrol, their packs and everything. So they are really in a horrible spot. So if your players start to push for what's our reward going to be and everything, don't even go down that road. You don't have to reward your player characters just for doing what adventurers should be doing, in my opinion. That's all my opinion. Oftentimes it's not met very well, but that's my opinion. We play this game to adventure. We shouldn't require special, motivators to adventure. The adventure is the reward, in my opinion, for the most part. I do still give rewards and everything, but I don't do it to entice them to go on their adventures. And then the last little bit on this tier that I want to kind of dial into before we start talking about the caverns themselves is aggress. And this is setting up the approach. Pardon me. So with this approach aspect, my initial thoughts were, because of our sergeant who is going through and trying to go through the rubble and look for survivors, anything like that, we will have a couple of lines. Line down, and we'll put a line down here. So there are going to be, we'll put limited ropes down to the rubble. Depending on approach, possible first encounter. So as you describe the scene and really make this seem like a horrific event that should stir the characters to action, now that we have the scene set up, how are we going to allow them to move into the action? So your players may come up with their own goods. I mean, who's to say they couldn't just jump in and feather fall, right? There are so many ways that your players could do it, but we want to give that opportunity to allow, them not to be reliant on themselves. So as Sergeant Hammond is sending people in to check the rubble and everything, they've got a couple of rope lines down, and they're guarding those and protecting them from the creatures that are coming out from the multiple camps, as well as from their own kind of headquarter camp area on the southern road. And so this should be an area where they can go down. Now I do want to have the field of debris should be an encounter in and of itself for a couple of reasons. If your players are going down there, I want them to have that bit of opportunity to have some type of encounters here for a couple of reasons. The first one is, if, depending on the character makeup and everything, you could have them come across something like a rescue scene where, as they're traversing this rubble trying to do dexterity checks or acrobatic checks, what have you, they could hear a very faint sound where a section of wall has trapped somebody, and can they get them or not? This should be something that is kind of setting the stage and allowing them to interact with the environment itself. Now, at the same time, depending on when they're doing this, if they go in at night, I want them to encounter some type of a villainous element, right? Some type of a skirmish on this front, which is where I want to drop Denethal, who is going to be our big bad. I want him to come out from the mouth of the cavern, bark some orders, and really show that there is this figure that is a big badass that the character should want to pursue into the caverns. Now, the reason I want to think about it in this aspect is, if my characters decide to post up here and watch for a night and just look and see, or one of the other camps, I want them to see this occurring, and they could assist with the archers who are going to try to launch dozens of arrows down and drive these creatures back into the caverns, or try to ultimately confront them in the rubble. Now, the big bads, we know based on the setup, they're looking for the cornucopia, and they will also be kind of going through the rubble. And so that's kind of the skirmish front that I want. The villains are coming out to try to get the cornucopia that they believe is there, which actually isn't. The characters are trying to help the people, right? Help Sergeant Hammond, but also explore an adventure. This sets up an opportunity for them to do a lot of different types of adventures. If they want to go on a rescue, they can. If they want to just go into tactical combat, they can. If they want to do planning, scoping out, spying, sneaking, anything like that, it gives them an opportunity. Ultimately, they should find their way to the cavern and get some type of an aspect into the cavern. Now, if we do the rescue mission, that person that they pull out could give some details. Thank you, Jamie James. If they do that rescue piece, that person could talk about the monsters that are coming from below the ground, calling out that they are looking for the cornucopia. So we can use that to start putting clues down. Otherwise, if they take a tactical approach, one of the villains could have a scroll, maybe it's written in deep speech or something, where it describes what they're after, what they're supposed to be searching for with this horn of cornucopia. The ultimate aspect is I want the adventurers, as they get to this location, to be able to spend a little bit of time, do some planning, and really take stock of the situation before diving into the caverns. Because once they get into the caverns, I want them to spend at least 2.5 days. So this is actually a game, Jamie James. This is for a campaign that we're writing for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And this is, we're kind of like 1/4 of the way through writing it. So the first aspects of the start point up until basically this is a 5th level. So those aspects we covered in previous videos. This is broken by tier. So this is the tier 2. So the tier 2 is when the adventurers, all the characters, really get to dive in. So with this location now having some good structure to it, again, I'm not going to map this out in great detail. I'm going to use theater of the mind and describe it. So my rough sketch here is going to be good enough for me as a GM to be able to do good descriptions and set the stage, but I don't want to give my players an actual map, because if I were to give them a scale map, it's a couple of things. One, it takes a lot of time to do good maps that you want to use in the game. And for this one here, I want this to be a waypoint. This isn't going to be a home base. This isn't going to be a location that I want them to spend a lot of time in. I want them just to adventure from here. So by just having this rough sketch, it's good enough for me to have good details to be able to describe locations, give them opportunities to look at how they're going to confront the problem, evaluate, I suppose, and confront the problem before actually going in on the adventure of the sunken cavern. So the tier 2 aspect setup is all about finding the right tone with the people who are loyal but also in need of assistance and aid, kind of low on supplies, running out of options, still trying to defend their people and to salvage what they can from their lives, but also villains who are by now definitely after something. Now that should pique the character's interest. We definitely need to make sure that we're calling out that these villains who are coming out of this cavern, these monsters that are coming out of the cavern, are after something. Ultimately, this first adventure for the 5th level should be about them just going in and confronting the kind of villains in this cavern. I want them to want to learn more. What is this cornucopia and why are they after it? So that'll be further on. The first task at hand is keeping these people safe and kind of confronting those villains in that cavern. So that's the ultimate setup and goal for this adventure. And that leads us out of our tier 2 piece. So our tier 1 is all about the local village and the heroes coming in their own and becoming part of a party. Tier 2 is all about exploring the bigger world. For that, as we go into the details, we know we've already called out that we want to have them confront creatures from the Underdark and start traveling more underground into a bigger complex of the villain, Darethal. So for the cavern, we have to really think about, for 5th level, we've got to keep them underground, or at least away from support, for 2.5 days. 2.5 days of cavern dwelling and delving and cave diving and spelunking, so the whole 9 yards. Hey, James, thank you. Yes, the Dwarf Ranger for Icewind Dale. I've still yet to paint it. I've got them all cleaned up and ready to go. I haven't slapped any paint on him yet. This Wednesday, we'll actually be creating another character. I thought about doing a villain, but I'm going to stick with a character because I saw one that really piqued my interest. So watch for that. I think it's going to be a good one. And again, we're going to go off script and probably not in the player's handbook for this one. So for the cavern, for this adventure itself, we know we're going to have 2.5 days, which means we need at least 2 waypoints, right? So I'm going to just put a waypoint here, and this is going to be night 1. As a GM, I don't want to, for this campaign, I don't want to have my characters go through and lose, right? We're there to tell a story together, and it's the character's story. So while I want to make it challenging and really push my players to come up with ideas and solutions to the problems that I'm throwing at them, I want to give them every opportunity I can. So I, as a GM, I want to think about those waypoints. I want them to be able to have a night where they can rest up and heal up and get their spell slots back and all of that. So day 1, day 2, and then I want to have another waypoint, and then that half a day. And day 1. So for that cavern, we need to be able to, and the way I think about this, which is kind of funky, but I think about it almost like in a side view, if you will. And part of it comes from just my love of caves overall. I love caves. If you ever look at maps, like for instance, Wind Cave, so many maps they have, like 3D maps and everything. I love cave maps and environments. So I think about it almost from like a cross section. So we know they're already underground, right? And so when they enter the cave, I want them to ultimately have a downward trajectory. And this is an element where we're going to put up that these caverns have been honeycombed all throughout underneath this town. This has been going on for a long time in preparation of bringing the town down into this sinkhole. So I want to have, ultimately, if the characters show any type of an interest, especially if you have anything like dwarves, they'll be able to tell right away that this cavern has been used a lot, it's old, and based on the way it was built, this was part of a bigger structure, most likely under the town, which led it to collapse. Because the villains were after that primary goal, and this was the outcome of that. So I want it to go down a bit, and then for me, I try to think of my 6 encounters a day. So we could have the half a day be that front as they're going through the rubble, but I'm going to plan that for kind of later. I'm not going to think about that as it kind of pertains to the cavern itself. So I know I'm going to want to have at least 5 encounters, right? We think about a 5-room dungeon setup almost, because you know your adventuring day is on average 6 adventures or 6 encounters. So I'm going to plan 5, and I want these to kind of go in an order like this. I want them to go down even from where they're down. I want them to go down further, and then down even further, and then a long ways down. So there we've already got 4 encounters. There's our 5th, and then that's not level. And then an area where they'll feel secure enough to spend the night. Even though I still will have a possibility of a random encounter, a wandering monster, something like that, I want to give them an opportunity to have an area where they should be able to secure themselves and feel like they're safe enough to spend a night. Because they'll have already had one adventuring day, I want to allow them that opportunity to recharge. And then after night 1, right, so that would actually be here, or down a little bit, actually. We want them to continue going down a little bit. This is where the second day comes into play. And this is one of those ones where you have to start thinking about your balance piece. So if this took 1 day, does it take another adventuring day to get back up? I don't think so, because while I believe in repopulating areas, not over 1 day. I think it takes time. You know, nature abhors a vacuum, but not overnight. So I'm going to do the same thing and plan to dive them down deep. Deeper and deeper and deeper they go into the earth. Now you can see I made this one pretty big, and I'm actually going to double box this because this is the 3rd encounter of the day. That's where I want them to have a more challenging encounter. I want them to kind of get through 2 challenging encounters, but then a very hard encounter. And then down they go, and then they'll also not level. They'll have another place to spend the night. So if you think about this almost in like how many stories down, they're getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the earth. Because this section, I really want them to get into the edge of the Underdark, really. This is going to be a super deep complex that leads into the bigger picture of what they are encountering in this tier, where they're looking at saving the realm itself. Not just the location, not just the area, not just a town, but the realm itself. I want them to get a glimpse of the Underdark and the figure of Darethal, who is pulling a lot of these strings. By this point here, they should have a good understanding that there is something larger at play here, which is going to have a bigger impact for the entire region. Now, I want them to overall have success, but I don't want them to confront our big bad guy and defeat him. They may encounter him, but ultimately that big bad is going to be too strong for them, and whether he teleports away or the characters end up fleeing, however it plays out, that taste of the bigger picture, as well as clearing out these aspects and seeing that they're on the verge of the Underdark, I don't want them to go into the Underdark yet. So ultimately I want to have this place here, this second half day, or at night, depending on how things are going. I want them to come across some type of an aspect that's going to kind of give them the okay that this cavern is cleared out. It's too much ahead. You need to resupply. You need to start informing people. You need to do research. Ultimately, you should not proceed ahead at this point. Lick your wounds, do some research, find out the aspects of what's going on, and then come back with a different type of plan kind of deal. This is just one adventure out of 5 that they'll be going through for this aspect. So while I want to get them to this absolute last piece, the second night, I want it to kind of leave off on a hook of there's more beyond that. So ultimately then, whether they go back up through the caverns or whatever, again, we could have that half a day where something is coming back in, all depending on our day 1. So when they first get to this location and start talking to the people and seeing what's going on, that's going to determine that half a day. Is that half a day going through the rubble field and coming across survivors, possibly having some type of a skirmish in the rubble? To be determined. It's all going to be dependent on my players. It's an aspect I've got to be ready for, but ultimately it doesn't mean it's going to happen, so I can't plan too much for it. If not, then that half a day is going to be 2 or 3 encounters that they have to do moving back up. And that's where it could be lesser creatures trying to move into this vacuum of a space that the party had cleared, wandering monsters that they have not yet encountered, whatever the case may be. It could be some creatures returning to report from other locations. Who knows? Again, until I see how the characters' approach are set up on the field, I can't really plan too much more details. But ultimately, we have a kind of a plan in place for the first adventure. We've got the location all set up, and we've got ideas for NPCs that we can pop in and start putting in place, thinking about possibly even prepping up our miniatures in case any of them are going to go along with the adventurers. I always do like to put some type of an NPC in there. In this case, I would probably pick somebody who is some type of a soldier who has been shooting arrows at these creatures as they're coming out of the caverns each night, and volunteers to guide the characters on and to assist them along the way. I like that for a couple of reasons, because it allows me some opportunity to provide some feedback if the characters have questions as they're adventuring, but it also allows me to interact a little bit more with the characters in the moment. So while I would never have a PC, I don't mind having an NPC come along, and whether that's just to help watch their back or cook food or something, I like to have an NPC nearby so that I can have interaction and drive interaction with the characters. So this private could kind of question them about how they know each other, especially if you have any type of funkiness at the table. If you have characters who are not communicating very strong or anything, you can use an NPC to call that out. So by having an NPC go through and assist, it's a great opportunity to do that. Also, you could have it be an NPC who was captured and the PCs free them in one of these encounters, especially on like day 1. He could really be a captured soldier or even just a captured merchant who is still kind of that bond for your characters. So tier 2 on our overall adventure that we are doing, we've got the premise of the first adventure location. We've got a good idea of how to set it up and some opportunities to build in some adventuring hooks. Next week, we'll actually go through and start putting the encounters together and looking at the breakdown of how we can challenge the characters, what types of creatures we can use, what challenge ratings to use, and ultimately how we can make this be a cohesive piece from the standpoint that we're leading them into the gray wastes. Ultimately, everything on this adventurer's journey should lead them to the gray wastes. So we have to think of things that ultimately would lead them into demons and larvas and creatures that they'll find in the gray wastes. That's the end goal. That's where we want to get them to. We want to give them those little snippets of what's coming, what's on the horizon, what that prophecy that we dropped at the very beginning means. And by making sure that we're consistent with everything that we've been dropping so far with our cultists and with the symbologies in the forest and the woods, all the way to the creatures that they're going to be encountering along this way, who are working for Denethor, ultimately should be leading them down this path that over time, over exploration, over adventuring, it should be very apparent that they are going to the gray wastes, and that the not only region is at stake, or ultimately the continent in Tier 3, but ultimately the realm itself as we get into Tier 4. So the setup is super important, making sure that we have tie-ins to what's come before and what's going on ahead is super important, something to be cognizant of. And as we keep building our adventures, we'll dive more and more into it. If you are here and caught the show live, I thank you. Don't hesitate, give me a follow. I'm not looking for subscribers at all, but the more followers that we get, the better the algorithm works, so we can get in front of more people who hopefully will be able to share and enjoy our content. Of course, be sure to check out our other VODs. They're on Twitch for, I believe, 1 week. We also port them over to YouTube, so you can find Green Oaks on YouTube, and all of our previously aired videos are there. Of course, we do everything from our Monday night show, where we are exploring game worlds, creating game worlds, and talking about exploration of the game worlds that we create. Wednesday nights, we are creating characters and villains that you can use in games, and really taking inspiration from miniatures rather than having to find a miniature to meet the character that you come up with. We're using miniatures to create conceptualized characters that you can put a lot of information into and really get behind those miniatures in your game through great characters or villains. On Friday nights, we do reviews and just chatting about the hobby, pursuing a passion. It's all about RPGs and everything that comes to support RPGs. This next Friday, we've got some great content that we're going to be looking at, things like dice bags and dice boxes. So some fantastic content coming up, why they're important, and how you can really use them for the people that you play with. And then Saturday, we're in the studio live painting. We start that at 12 Central Standard Time, and we paint for, it can be anywhere from 1 to 6 hours, I think we've gone in the past, painting all kinds of things from display miniatures to competition miniatures to miniatures just for the tabletop. So if you enjoy miniature painting and miniature painting hobby, or painting in general, don't hesitate. Come join us then. It's just open chat, me painting, and just enjoying the time with the brushes and paints. That's the show for tonight, starting the Tier 2 in our campaign of our level 1 to 20 campaign that we're building. Next week, we're going to dive into heavy details on Tier 5 encounter building and story setup. So make sure you join me then. Thank you for joining me. And Jamie James and James Mack, I appreciate the comments, and thank you for joining me. Have a great night, and bye-bye.